Welcome to Valor Conversations. I'm your host, Jay Trainer. Valor Conversations is powered by CSB Ministries and is the official podcast of Christian Service Brigade. For more information, please visit csbministries.org. And now, on with the show. Hello, friends. We continue to venture forward in our series for Valor Conversations called Brigade Tune-Up, gearing our units for the new ministry year coming up this fall. There are, of course, many resources and things that are available that many leaders are not aware of. And while we want to share these resources with you, we don't want to be a quote-unquote how-to guide. We want others to share their own experiences using these resources that are ultimately available to them. So our guest today here on Valor Conversations has been involved in Brigade for a long period of time. Jerry Smith, has served as a captain in Battalion Unit 1180 and is currently continuing to support Battalion. And I'm sure he'll share a little bit about his story with regard to his time with Brigade and his time specifically with Battalion. Today, he joins the podcast to discuss a number of issues surrounding leadership and longevity. And spoiler alert, it's not the type of longevity you might be thinking about. So, Jerry, welcome aboard. It's good to have you to be part of today's discussion. Let's first start off our discussion surrounding or talking about your introduction into Brigade and how the Lord brought you into leadership within Battalion specifically.
Sure. Hey, thanks for having me on, Jay. I appreciate you. My first experience with Brigade, we actually transferred to Northmar Church, me and my 6 brothers and parents. And I was 17 years old when I first started going to Battalion. So I was pretty late to the party, but my brothers were right in the zone where we would be ministering to them in their early high school years, and some of them even into elementary school. They were looking forward to going. There's 15 years difference between me and my youngest brother. So I started out at Battalion, and it was my senior year. So I got 1 year of Battalion. Wow. And then I talked to the then captain, Mike Sams. He was captain of Battalion 1180 for about, 30 years or so. And he asked me to stay on as a lieutenant, I think mainly because he wanted my brothers to keep coming and I was their ride. So it was his opportunity to have more people in the program. But that was really my introduction to CSB, was right there at 17 years old. I had just graduated and I was getting ready to start college, and there I was, a lieutenant.
Amazing. It's very interesting to hear the different backstories of how the Lord brought people into this ministry. And I appreciate you sharing your story a little bit on the get-go of this conversation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you've had the chance to be involved in leadership for a while now. Excuse me. Let's talk about this leadership longevity a little bit and some of your thoughts surrounding serving in a longer term capacity. What has allowed you to remain in some leadership capacity over the years, and what changes have happened over time in your leadership?
All right. Yeah. So I guess maybe the best place to start is to just continue right there. When I was, a young man, after serving as a lieutenant for several years, I found myself about to get married. I was 22 years old, and Mike was transitioning to a new season of his life. He was the captain before I was, and he was going to be leaving the church, and he asked me to be the captain. He asked if I was interested in running our Brigade unit, and there I was, 22 years old, about to start my life as a married man, and not really sure what that all entailed, but I felt very distinctly that, yes, this is something I think God's calling me to do. And I didn't feel altogether qualified. There were men that had been in the program much longer than I had been, who had deep roots in CSB and had a better understanding of the program than perhaps I had. But I felt very, very called to lead in Battalion, and I didn't see myself going anywhere else. In fact, when I had met my wife, I told her that this ministry was such a foundational part of who I am that she needs to be prepared that I would be gone some weekends, and I would be gone on Monday nights, which is when we met. And that this was a big commitment for me. So when he asked me to be captain, I prayed about it, and I said yes, I would be willing to step into that capacity. And so for 15 years, I led Battalion 1180 as its captain, and we have a very healthy battalion. We have 35 boys and 15 adult leaders who meet on a regular weekly basis. The thing with any leadership is when you first start out, you have a healthy understanding of your own inadequacies. It's very easy to see where you end and where God begins because it's all new. And every challenge that comes your way, you see that God's hand is taking you through it. The issue that I have sometimes with longevity in a ministry is over time, you become pretty good as a human at overcoming challenges that come your way, and things become a result of root memory instead of reliance on God, or at least it can be. And we begin to develop programs and systems, and we insulate ourselves from unknowns. And I found myself starting to do that. And I always told myself, look, as soon as I feel like this is me and not God doing it, I'm beginning to head down the wrong path. And I've talked to several men throughout my years. I've been blessed to be mentored by men that have been a few steps beyond me. And any one of them that stayed in a ministry too long, each of them have said something similar. I felt God calling me gently, and I ignored the gentle call until he had to pull the rug out from underneath me. And I didn't want to ignore the gentle call. I felt that this past year that God was starting to say, look, you've been utilized by me for this time in this season, and I'm calling someone else to fill this role. And that can be kind of I don't know, disheartening in a way, because you feel you find your identity in this. We each of us find our identity in the ministry that God has called us to. And the reality is that God calls people for a season, and he calls people for a time and a purpose. And he doesn't call the qualified often. He often qualifies those that he calls. So if I stay in the same position for too long, I begin to rely on my own understanding. And we start to lose track of the trembling hands, I call it, of ministry, where I'm not really sure where it's going, and I'm not really sure how I'm going to get there, but I know God's calling me to it. And so my ideas or my thoughts on this longevity is I need to be willing to pass that torch, which is a brigade slogan, but I need to be willing to pass that torch to others, even though I don't feel that they are ready, because God called me before I was ready.
Right.
And my hope is that this next guy who's stepping in as captain, his name's Isaiah Blair, and I've mentored him for several years now. My hope is that he doesn't feel ready, but that he realizes that God's calling him to it. And if he realizes that God's calling him to it, he's going to, with trembling hands, move forward. And he's going to be able to rely on the goodness of God to solve the problems that he's going to come across. And when our ministries have those trembling hands, I think that God is pleased. I think that God is honored in those things, because we're not relying on our own understanding.
Yeah, we want to really promote the element of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, right? Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and
Absolutely.
allow him to guide your pathways, right? And
it's really hard, Jay, when we have been down the same path over and over again. We do begin to lean on our own understanding. It's just like, oh, I know this step, and oh, I know this path. And it's real easy to just continue on that route over and over and over again, as ministry years can go to ministry decades. And it's tempting to stay in it because we become good at it. And there's honor in it.
There's honor in it. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we missed that part, but go ahead and share that again real quick.
I apologize. Yeah, I had an interruption there, but yeah, it's tempting to want to receive the congratulations on 30 years of a job well done in the same capacity. And there is some value to that. But I think the greater value is to listening to God's calling. And if he calls you to something new, listening to the still small voice of the calling instead of clinging to something for so long that it has to be torn from you painfully. And it can also be painful for the program itself. We can get stale. And I think it's important that we are passing that torch to the next generation. And it doesn't mean that my torch goes out.
Right.
I still plan on mentoring the lieutenants in the battalion as a support lieutenant. But Isaiah, he's going to be the captain of Battalion 1180. And he's going to be the one that God utilizes moving forward. And if for that extent, he's going to also be the one that receives that glory as it is. And that's a good thing. It's a healthy thing, because then we have somebody else who can step up in a leadership capacity. And we're starting to multiply, like 2 Timothy 2:2 tells us, or 2:22. We're able to, the things that we've heard pass on to the next generation, who are able to teach others. And we're duplicating our efforts that way.
That's awesome. And so your involvement is still there. It's not as though you say, forget it, I'm out, I'm done. Right. It's just a changing of the guard and a different hat that you're going to be wearing. And so for the sake of context, for our listeners and for my own understanding, how old are you now? You said you started at 22, and how old is Isaiah coming into this?
Absolutely. So I'm 37, and Isaiah is 22. So there's nothing magical about those numbers, and the reality is I've been blessed by God to keep this focus. I think even since I was a young man, I've been looking for individuals who can step up and start programs on their own. And the hope is that, we would train lieutenants who were able to take charge and start a brigade program at whatever church they found themselves at. And we've seen some of that. And my own brother, Andrew, he is the captain at Huntsburg's battalion, which is in Ohio. And so we've seen some duplication outside of the church context. But I've always tried to keep an eye on, okay, what does the future leadership look like? And I think that, as I said, there's really not anything special about 37. And there's certainly nothing special about 22. It just so happens to be the fact that Isaiah was brought in by God at the moment that he was brought in for the purpose that God designed him to be there. And I didn't know when Isaiah first started coming to battalion. And it's funny because he didn't grow up in battalion either. And he came in and he started bringing his nephews a few years ago, and he took to the program, and he saw the vision of men using their passion for life to demonstrate a passion for Christ. And he saw how mentorship works and discipleship works in this program, and he fell in love with it as well. And so really what God's looking for is a willing heart, one that is willing to be humble before him. And that's what I was looking for as well. And I didn't know that God was going to lead me to a different season. I just knew that it was the right thing to do. And then when I knew it was the right thing to do, I asked, okay, well, who shall it be? Who will step up next? And then he led me to Isaiah. And then Isaiah prayed about it, and he said, Jerry, I don't really feel like I'm the right guy or I'm qualified, but God's calling me there. I said, you're the right guy. It sounds like that's the solution we're looking for. And so we've been meeting, and Jay, I'm going to be meeting with him and mentoring him for the next year. And it's going to be a relationship that's built between us.
Awesome.
But it's going to be his, and it's going to be as the Lord leads him, and it's going to be mistakes that he makes, and it's going to be victories that are won, and it's all going to be based on his reliance to God. But I'm going to be there, and I'm going to look forward to doing my helping with a squad, and I'm going to look forward to training our adult leaders and helping them be this missional generational focused as well.
Awesome. So let's talk about the dangers of hanging on too long to leadership when one is being led in a different direction. You talked about how it could even be detrimental to a program. And so what dangers have you seen or personally experienced because of hanging on too long? And if someone might be struggling with this aspect themselves, what advice would you give to them? I think I know what you might give, but again, to those that might be listening about letting go and walking in that humility instead of being later humiliated, what advice might you give them towards letting go?
Yeah, I mean, I think you started to hit it right there with humiliating versus being humble. And the reality is that the biggest risk to staying in a ministry beyond the time that you're called is you begin to think that it's happening because of you.
Right.
If I'm not here, this isn't going to happen. And I've been in that situation, even with battalion, if I don't make this happen, it's not going to happen. And that's a dangerous place to be, because there's two edges to that knife. The first edge to that knife is, if I'm not there and it doesn't happen, then it was Jerry's program, not God's, because God will see his will done. The second sharp edge to that knife is I'm not raising up the next generation the way I'm supposed to. So if it's not going to happen because I'm not there, it's because I'm failing to train up individuals who are able to also teach. 2 Timothy 2 talks about that. So if I'm failing on either one of those regards, I'm not being faithful to the program or the ministry that was being entrusted to me to begin with. And we find ourselves, like I said, over years, we get into this routine. And this is the way it works because it's always worked this way. And this is what God called me to when he called me 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And the reality is God is always calling us to grow. And he's not calling us to become comfortable with him. He's calling us to rely upon him more and in new ways. And I would say that as soon as you are feeling comfortable in a ministry, where you don't approach it, like I said, with those trembling hands, I think we find ourselves at a crossroads. And when I feel comfortable, like, okay, I've got this figured out, I know how this runs, and this is an unsavory or uncomfortable thing to think about, because I like being comfortable. If I'm going to be in ministry, I certainly want to do something that I've got figured out.
Right.
But God doesn't call us to things that we have figured out. He never calls us to things that we have figured out. Even Moses in the wilderness, first he tells him to strike a rock, then he tells him to talk to a rock. He's always changing up the way that we rely on him. He's always taking us further. Okay, if I strike the rock with a staff, out comes water. Whoa, that's awesome. Okay, now I just want you to speak to the rock. I want you to trust me just a little bit more. How awesome that is. And we can fail because we fall back into our routines. So the danger is that God will whisper to us first. He'll start to lead the longing of your heart in a new direction. And I think that when he starts speaking that way, if we're sensitive to that, we can be filled with joy at what he takes us to next, because he will raise the right person up to take your place. And if he doesn't, sometimes he calls an end to one season of ministry to make room for another.
That's very true. So let's talk about that hard-heartedness that you were talking about, that you hinted at, and even develop that thought even a little bit more. Hard-heartedness, it doesn't belong in any ministry context. It doesn't really belong anywhere, not even in the heart of a believer.
Right.
It shouldn't be there, but yet bitterness, it runs commonplace in our world today.
Right.
Where and when have you seen hard-heartedness in ministry, and what sort of corrections do you think can be made when hard-heartedness needs to really be eradicated or taken care of in the first place?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen it. I've seen it personally on two different occasions. One of which involves me, and another involves a friend of mine, which has been restored, but it was still a difficult situation. And hard-heartedness occurs when you dismiss the still small voice of God calling you to something new, and you entrench in, and it's built on pride. And going back to the Moses analogy, as he led him out of Egypt, it's Pharaoh. God hardened Pharaoh's heart, but Pharaoh was a proud man, and it took many plagues to convince or to break Pharaoh. And even beyond that, Pharaoh still pursued him into the wilderness, and God said, look, I will harden his heart one more time, and then I will utterly destroy him. And he destroyed the armies of Pharaoh in the Red Sea. And I think that is analogous to our walk, and it can be, is pride is our downfall. Pride is what hardens our heart. It's what makes us feel that we're the ones that are capable of accomplishing what we're accomplishing. And in the case of my dear friend, he knew that he was being called to something else, and he hesitated, and he dug his heels in, because there was a comfort in staying in his vocational ministry. There was a comfort in staying where he was at. And the place that God was calling him was not to a better land. It didn't, or at least economically, it was less pay,
Right.
and it was less desirable. So he dug his heels in to the point where it was, there was some confrontation, and he was removed. And it was damaging to him. It was damaging to his ministry. It was damaging to the church that he served. Now, God has been gracious and humbled his heart, and he was restored. But the reality is God is going to have his way. And I saw that in my own life as a younger man, just in my work with our youth. We have two programs. We have battalion, and we also have a youth group at our church. And
Okay, that's great.
I just got comfortable working with our youth. I was working with them right alongside of working with battalion, and it gave me two sides of the coin. And but God started saying, look, I don't want you to work in the junior high ministry anymore. I want you to focus in on a battalion. And this was about 5 years ago. And I said, oh God, I got my son coming up. He's about to enter into middle school. I want to be there. I want to be there. And I just started suffering. Started suffering anxiety, and I had no way of discerning where or from whence it came. I just did not feel good. I felt completely anxious and unwell. And I prayed about it and prayed about it and prayed about it. But I still wasn't willing to give up this ministry. God, you called me to this. I look at the great work that we're able to do, by building relationships in youth group, and then taking these kids into battalion as well. It was a perfect synergy, Jay.
Yeah.
But the reality is that God was calling me to something different, and I was unwilling to give it up. And he basically, I broke down. The anxiety was such that I couldn't really bear it. And I told a few close friends, and I had to reevaluate my priorities. And I had to give it up. I gave up youth group, and I stayed with battalion, and the burden was lifted. Now, I wish that I had listened when he said that this in the still small bells. I wish I would have listened. But sometimes that stubbornness, that hardness of heart can persist. But God will have his way, and he will have his purpose fulfilled. And it's a blessing for us to listen the first time.
You've referenced the quiet whisper. Of course, I'm automatically taken to Elijah, 1 Kings 19, right? The still small voice of the whisper of the Lord. How have you been led of the Holy Spirit during your time serving as a brigade leader? And maybe what are some tangible ways you have sensed the Holy Spirit's leading? Yeah, the whispers there, the gut check is there at times. Are there any other tangible ways that you think, man, that is the Lord speaking to me about something?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, my internal wiring, Jay, is that of an introvert. I do not enjoy the public light. I am recharged when I'm on my own, and ministry doesn't allow that. Ministry, as a leader, you need to pull forward. You need to encourage and draw people to new heights. And I see God's hand most effectively when I step out of myself and I say, okay, God, we're going to do this event. I don't want to do this event. I have anxiety of leading up to this event. I want to stay home, and I'm sure I could cancel it and come up with some excuse like COVID, or whatever, a couple years ago,
Right.
But when I see God the most is at the conclusion of such events or at the conclusion of such lessons, looking back and saying, wow, if I had had my way, this would not have happened.
Wow.
Therefore, I know that God had his way. And that's how I see his hand, Jay. And I don't know how to describe it or express it any better than that. Is if I had my own way, I would be in my room reading a book. Instead, God calls me to do this for this purpose, for this time, and it makes me uncomfortable. And when it makes me uncomfortable, I know that God is having his way in my life. And that's the most evidence that I see of his hand in my life, is when I'm most uncomfortable, which circles all the way back to routine and longevity in ministry. Is our tendency is to find the comfort in the routine. And God is constantly pulling us out of the comfort and the routine to draw us to new places. And that's when we see his hand most clearly, is when he takes us to places we would not have otherwise taken ourselves.
The more uncomfortable we get, the more needy we should become.
Absolutely. Amen.
In terms of the things of the Lord. So that's good. Now, as we begin to wind down here, a couple more things. One of the things that I love talking about with our guests are their individual passions. You've mentioned about the introverted nature, just me, myself, and I. You like that quiet time.
Yeah.
And also not only those passions, but those winning moments in ministry. Jerry, what would you say is a win for you in ministry? How is a win in ministry even measurable to you? What do you think?
Sure. Well, one of the reasons, Jay, that I love Battalion is because its focus is on training the next generation. It's on mentorship, discipling men, young men, to become men of God. And my wins in ministry are fairly simple. Is I go to my church and I see young 20-something-year-old men who went up through Battalion that I had a personal hand in mentoring, and I'm watching them mentor others, and I'm watching them lead in ministries that God has taken them to. Not just Battalion, although I have guys in our battalion that were there since they were in Trailblazer, Explorer, Trailblazer Guide. Yeah. And they're still helping out, and that does encouraging. But I go to church at Northmar and I get to watch these young men fill ministry roles for the church. And it makes me realize that there's a purpose for what we do. It shows me God's bigger picture. Just a glimpse of it is we are entrusting these truths with men who are able to then go and teach themselves to other men. And that's the goal. So those are my ministry wins, is seeing these young men step up and lead in the church. And that's how I know that God is at work.
I love when people express themselves in an interview type of situation or a conversation like this, the vulnerability that has been shared, and you've been very vulnerable, and I want to thank you for that. Just that's one of my own wins, is just connecting at that level where people can freely express, hey, this is where I am at, not trying to degrade it, not trying to sugarcoat it. So I want to thank you for joining in today. Do you have any additional thoughts? You get the last word. Anything that you'd like to share
Sure.
It's kind of an open-ended question.
Sure. I would say this is continuously evaluate where God has called you to be, because he often calls you further than you're at, to harder things than you find yourself. And he doesn't often show you where the landing spot is. And I don't know why he called me to transition from being a captain to being a lieutenant. I have some ideas and I have some vision, but he has not fully shown me the next step. And the reality is that the next step is not often greater glory for yourself. It's not often that which will bring you higher esteem. In fact, often the way God uses us is to draw us more and more into humbler situations. And be prepared for that, because if we're truly listening to where God's calling us, his path is not often our path. His ways are not often our ways, but he does have the best plans. And I have experienced that personally, and I'm looking forward to where those next steps may be.
Awesome. Jerry, thank you for joining in here on Valor Conversations. Truly, I appreciate the time and the stories that you've shared with everyone regarding longevity and the importance of being aware, really, of the Holy Spirit's lordship and leadership. Right. Thank you again. Thanks. And may the Lord continue to move in you and through you as you impact the young men still under your care, even transitioning out of the captaincy into something else. It's a beautiful thing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate you.
Thanks for tuning into Valor Conversations with your host, Jay Trainer. Valor Conversations is powered by CSB Ministries and is the official podcast of Christian Service Brigade. For more information, please visit csbministries.org. And in the meantime, stay tuned for more Valor Conversations coming your way soon.